Good. Well, thank you. Well, gosh, what an introduction. Gosh, you know, I'd love to talk about my trips across Africa and Tibet. I've just been to the Andes as well, cycling across the Andes. So I could spend hours talking about that, and I'll have a whole nother presentation. So look, I'm already sort of slightly overawed. I've had a couple of conversations beforehand and realised that you are the greenest audience I think that I've ever presented to. Everybody's house is insulated, everybody's got an electric car, you know, you all do great things in your community. So in some ways I could just go home. What actually, and the introduction that you've given me, Felicity, I wasn't actually going to talk about the mayoral stuff, but I can do. I'm very happy to. I'm very happy to answer questions. So what I am going to do is talk more about the practical things that we can do, some of the policy changes in the long run I think that we need to make. So I hope I'm pitching it right, but there might be a little bit of sort of teaching grandma to suck eggs. So I will probably skip through those a little bit because we've got some sort of top tips that we might have, that kind of thing, but to save energy. But so forgive me if I am telling you stuff that you already know, and I hope that actually the Q&A is probably the place to really get the discussion going about what it is that we can do to tackle fuel poverty and climate change. The good thing is that these two are obviously linked. High fuel prices put more people into poverty, into fuel poverty, but also but the benefit of tackling fuel poverty is, of course, that we can reduce our carbon emissions at the same time. So whilst we are in a very difficult crisis and lots of people are genuinely struggling, there is a real opportunity here for businesses, for householders to change the way they heat their homes, how we use energy, which could have a really beneficial impact on our climate and our carbon emissions. So we are Severn Wye Energy Agency. Some of you, again, teaching grandma to suck eggs, have been trustees or members of staff at Severn Wye. So we're locally based. Our headquarters are just up the road in Hynham. But we do cover quite a wide area, and actually we're expanding. Even as we speak, we are building a carbon capture power station up in Liverpool, and we're starting to work up in the West Midlands as well. We've just agreed on new strategy, which is really focused on energy, so making sure that everybody has the energy they need to meet their basic needs. We're not talking about energy to heat your swimming pools or saunas, but making sure that everybody has the energy they need to meet their basic needs, and that the production of that energy does not destabilise our climate. So we want a world with a stable climate and energy for all. And we do that by providing energy advice. So we have an advice line in many of the places that you see here that people can call and get advice and information about energy efficiency, carbon emissions, that kind of thing. But also we will do a lot of support for very vulnerable households on how to give them advice on how to manage their energy use, get debt repayments if they need it, manage that relationship with their energy provider as well, and help keep them out of fuel poverty. We also have a range of energy services. So this is the technical stuff. We offer retrofit coordination, so we can oversee the retrofitting of your home. We also offer business services to business too, to reduce and manage their energy use, installing new equipment and that kind of thing. We offer consultancy to local authorities and others on how to go green. And finally, we do have an energy innovation programme. So we have a technical team who are looking at new forms of renewable energy. And as I say, the key thing that we're doing is we're building the country's first carbon capture power station that would power about 4,000 homes, or the equivalent of up in Liverpool. That should be built and operational by the end of this year or early next year. And I'm very happy to talk about the technicalities of that. It's a process called pyrolysis and produces this amazing stuff called biochar, which is fixed carbon. But again, very happy to talk about that in a bit. So what is our impact? And I think, Felicity, you had a copy, if you could hold it up, that we've got our new impact report, which is last year's impact report. But we know that the work that we do saves about 6,000 tonnes of carbon every year, probably about £500,000 of savings on bills every year. Actually, that's gone up. So this is from 2021. As Felicity said, energy prices have doubled, so we are probably saving people about £1 million or more on their energy bills. And specifically in Gloucestershire, we built in about £3.2 million of extra funding from government, from grant-making trusts, both for businesses and homes. So we try to measure our impact on how many people we keep out of fuel poverty and how much carbon we save every year. And we feel we are having an impact, but we need to do more. And of course, just to talk about the challenge we face, many of you will know that, and over the last year, things have got far worse in relation to fuel poverty, that between about 25 and 30% of houses are in fuel poverty. And without the energy price guarantee, which is disappearing in April, that could go up to 50%. And we class a household being in fuel poverty if they're spending more than 10% of their monthly income on their fuel bills. There are probably 7 to 10% of people are in extreme fuel poverty, so that's people who are spending over 20% just on keeping their homes warm. So there are genuinely people out there, including in wealthier places like Charlton and Gloucestershire, who are having to choose between heating and eating, who are staying in bed in order to keep warm, particularly during the cold snaps. We've been very lucky, actually. This winter has been a relatively mild one, and so the impact of high fuel prices has been less than we feared when the Ukrainian war first hit. But you know, this is a serious problem, and it's a systemic problem as well, not just because fuel prices are high, but also because we live in very leaky homes in this country. There's something like 20% on average less energy efficient than many of our European neighbours. So there is a systemic problem there. If we can retrofit our homes, then actually this would be less of a problem ever, even if fuel prices rise, because if our homes are more efficient, people will spend less money keeping them warm. And then, of course, climate change. I probably don't need to talk to you about this, but climate change is affecting us all. This is Tewkesbury, I think. Only a couple of years ago, we all know we've had the hottest year on record last year. We've had the coldest winters. You know, just in this country, we're seeing extreme weather, heat waves, storms, rainfall and flooding. But of course, in other countries, we're seeing wildfires, droughts, the expansion of deserts, and things that are having a real impact on people's lives, creating climate refugees. We've got about 8 years left worth of carbon as a planet, or as a race. We've got about 8 years worth of carbon at the current rate that we're producing it before we hit our 1.5 degree C. I'm going to be slightly depressing about it because I don't think there's a chance in hell that we're going to hit 1.5. Realistically, we're looking at probably more like 2.5 or 2.7. Now, we could turn that around, but I think we've just got to face up to the facts that it's going to be an awful lot worse, unless the big emitters like America, China, you know, obviously many of us in the West the same, but also the developing countries don't emit the amounts of carbon that we are. All of those things will have to change in order to hit 1.5, and I think we need to start owning up to ourselves that we're not going to hit that. And it's a slightly depressing thought. However, of course, there is stuff that you can do. So I'm going to rattle through this. On your chairs, we have our leaflet, which is 101 tips, 101 things that you can do to save energy in your home. So do have a look at that. We're always updating it on the web as well. Again, this one I'll sort of rush through a little bit because I get a sense that probably most of the people here know what I'm talking about. Setting your thermostat properly, you know, turning it down a degree or two. If you've got a gas condensing boiler, check your flow temperature. Many people don't do this. There are 2 dials on your condensing boiler. If you turn the flow temperature down, they're often set at around about 90 degrees. You can take it down to about 60 degrees. It won't affect the heat in your house at all, and will save you about 10 to 15% on your gas bills. I won't go into the details of why. Turning stuff off, particularly things that are on standby, it racks up the hours of electricity. LED bulbs, and getting a smart meter is the other key thing. Watching that little dial shoot to the red for a long time when you filled your kettle up right to the top for that single cup of tea. When you see it on a smart meter, you can it hits home how much energy you're using. So those are the sort of top tips, but these are the kind of things, again, you as activists within the within your community, please do get that message out there. These are quite simple things that anybody can do. So if you come across somebody who is still looking for ideas or how to save energy, then there are some really simple things. We've got this leaflet, but we've also got the website too. I'm going to talk a little bit about retrofitting as well, but again, I don't want to teach grandma too much to suck eggs, but this is important because this is the way that we can, as householders, we can begin to have a real and systemic impact on the amount of energy that we use. We reckon we need to reduce the amount of energy that we use in this country by about 15% as part of our 1.5 journey, our net zero journey to 2050. Luckily, if you retrofit your home, on average, you can save about 20%. That is an average. Some homes will save very little. Some homes you can save a whole lot more. Already had a couple of conversations. You can check your EPC, your Energy Performance Certificate. So what is the current rating of your house, just by putting your postcode in to the web link up there. There's some really simple stuff you can do. Seal your doors, put in some insulation in your roof. That's the sort of DIY stuff that you can do that's really quite simple. But then the key thing is, and this is something that we do at Severn Wye, is get a retrofit assessment. They're relatively cheap. Sometimes there's grant funding to do it. It's really complicated, and this is something I've learned. So I'm new to the energy sector. I've been doing this job for about 7 months, I think, now. In fact, when I was running for mayor, one of my pledges was that we were going to retrofit all of the 48,000 council homes in Bristol. Bristol has a lot of council homes. And one of my plans was to retrofit all of those. It was going to save a lot of money, create a lot of jobs, and obviously reduce carbon. I spoke to council officers and they said, yes, in theory you could do that over a 10-year period. I think if I'd known what I know now, I probably wouldn't have made that pledge. Not because it's not worthwhile, but because retrofitting is a really complicated thing to do. Every house is different. It depends how you use your house. If you're a couple who are in all day and heat the home all day, you want to retrofit your home in a different way to if you're, say, a young family or a working couple who's out and about and not heating their home during the day. So it becomes very complicated. Every house is different. You need to ventilate it in different ways, particularly around here. There's lots of listed buildings or conservation areas. So the retrofit assessment is the thing that will give you the information that you need to go to an installer and ask for what you want. So already I've had a conversation this evening with somebody who said, well, I had a call from a company who said they could retrofit my home, and I've got no idea whether what they're telling me is the right thing or whether they're just trying to make some money out of me, or even that it's a scam. If you get a retrofit assessment, you will have that information about your home that tells you what you can do, what will have the most impact in reducing your energy use, what potential for renewables there are, all of those sorts of things that you can then take to a company and tell them that that's what you want. It's always worth thinking fabric first, tech second. There's a temptation to have the thing that you can show off to your neighbours, the solar panels, the air source heat pumps, all of it's good stuff. But actually you will get far more bang for your buck and far more carbon reduction by putting in insulation, double glazing, all of those sorts of things. rather than the tech stuff. Do both if you can, but if you can't, do the fabric of your building first. And as I've said, every home is different. So, but I think it's important because lots of people do come to us with questions about how to retrofit their home and what do they need to do. I'll tell you a little bit about a project that we're running here in Gloucestershire. It's the first of its kind in the country. It's gone so well with the first 28 people we worked with. We're now working with about 1,000 patients on the NHS. It's gone so well that we've been on national TV 2 or 3 times. We've been on the One Show and BBC Breakfast, but we even had the New York Times and a German newspaper come to have a look at what we do. Very simply, the NHS knows that particular conditions, so if you're, say, going through chemotherapy or you have respiratory problems, that actually a cold home will make your health far worse, and therefore that will cost the NHS money. So they can offer now in Gloucestershire warmth on prescription. So if you are struggling to heat your home and you have a health condition, the doctor can say, okay, I want you to make sure that you have a warm home during the winter. They come to us, we'll do an assessment of their home, making any energy saving changes that we can, and then we will assess how much money that those patients, those householders need to keep their home warm during the winter, and we will pay out anything up to £1,000 over the winter months. And lo and behold, it works really well. Hardly any of the patients have had to go back to the NHS or back to their GP, so they know they've already saved far more in consultation and treatment fees than they have in paying out the few £1,000s that we have to those we've been piloting it with. So it's a great project that we're looking to roll out into other parts of the country, and so it's something we can be proud of here in Gloucestershire. I'll talk a bit about business as well, what businesses can do. And actually businesses is often where you can make more savings and pay back more quickly. And in some ways, the energy crisis is pushing businesses into making those changes in a way that they hadn't done before, which is really quite encouraging. So we know the businesses can save, you can probably save 10 to 12% if you're a sort of office-based business or a something that's not energy intensive, but the average savings that we make for businesses that are very energy intensive, manufacturing, catering, food distribution, that kind of thing, is between sort of 30 and 40%. So that means the payback period for those businesses now is about 2 to 3 years, which it's gone from being a 10-year payback for putting, say, solar or insulation into a business. It's now about 2 to 3 years, which is exactly the sort of horizon that businesses can work on. It's like, okay, if we make that investment now, then we know it will pay back within 2 to 3 years. So this is a sort of, again, anybody in business who is thinking about it, there are some really, really good examples, and I'll give you one in a second. A company locally called NH Case, they do food distribution. This is their warehouse here. We helped them install £100,000 worth, this was about 3 years ago, £100,000 worth, and how many gigawatt or megawatts was it? So 288 kilowatt solar array. Bear in mind, if you've got on your house, you've probably got 1 to 2, maybe 3 kilowatts on your house, so this is quite a serious surface area. And they are, they're spending 100,000. This was 2 or 3 years ago, 100,000. So they'll be spending 300,000 or so now on electricity. But they are saving now about £90,000 a year. So the payback time was probably 3 years, I think, or 4 years, something like that. And their carbon savings are 108 tonnes. And that's every year, so that's helped them on their way to net zero. So there's some really great companies in Gloucestershire. We've helped a furniture company heat their warehouse and their factory using the offcuts of wood from when the sawdust and the offcuts of wood are now heating their factories, so they're effectively energy neutral. There's still a carbon emission from burning the wood, but it's far less than it would have been, and it's a circular economy. So business, is really starting to look at this. When the market changes, as it has done over the last year, it really is making a difference for business, which is great. So what can we do? What can Parish Council do? What can community groups do? And again, you guys will know as much as I do, really. There are all sorts of things that happen within a community, planning applications, and consultations from the county council or national government. Make sure you have your voices heard, pushing new housing developments, for example, to have a high energy rating, to put in air source heat pumps and that kind of thing. That's the sort of thing that you as local people can have an influence on. Buying green, so whether it's your local organisation, your business, your community group, your parish council, you can do an environmental assessment over the things that you buy. The more that we purchase stuff with a carbon in mind, with climate change in mind, the more that companies who are supplying us, whether it's with paper or computers or chairs or whatever, if we're asking people for an environmental impact statement, they will start to consider it, realise they've got to do it in order to get the business, to win the business. And then you get companies like the one I've just shown you who will invest in new solar insulation and that kind of thing. Managing land for nature, particularly parish councils, if you own any land, do you have to mow it all? One of the things we managed to do in Bristol City Council was to get the council to leave 1/3 of almost all of the parks wild. So they're now they're cut once a year instead of sort of 5 or 6 times a year, which allows wildflowers to grow. It's good for pollinators. It's a really simple thing you can do, and lo and behold, it actually saved the council some money because if you're only mowing once a year, it costs you less. Saving energy, as we've just talked about, whether it's in a parish hall, if you can, we can do energy assessments for community buildings and that kind of thing. Supporting communities to take action. You can carbon offset. There's lots of conversations about whether that is, are we just assuaging our guilt? But I think our journey to net zero will involve some carbon offsetting. Government is beginning to accredit carbon offsets, the sort of gold standard stuff, which we know is genuinely taking carbon out of the air, right the way through to slightly dubious trees that might or might not be planted somewhere in Africa that are far cheaper. But soon there will be an accreditation that will tell you how certain the carbon offset is. Local grant pots, if you're a parish council, you've got a little bit of money, you can offer that to community groups and the like. Supporting local business, we've had parish councils and local authorities bringing local business together. We had one where it was a load of cafe owners, all of whom are small businesses. They're 2 or 3 people. They don't always know where to get milk in metal churns rather than plastic bottles, but one had done the research. This was in Bristol, and so all of the others learned from that. It meant the local dairy that was providing reusable metal churns for their milk then supplied far more. They could grow their business. There was something like 10,000 plastic bottles each month were saved because they were all sourcing their milk from a local dairy for the cappuccinos that all the rest of us were drinking during the day. So bringing local businesses together is really important. And making a plan. So up here are loads of different parish council plans on going green. Each one is different, but again, it brings communities together. So I hope that gives you a bit of a sense of what it is that we can do. I'm a practical person, so hopefully those are kind of practical tools. I'll say the final sort of slide I've got here is what I've learned. Felicity said, what have I learned in the last 6 months? I'm not from an energy background, nor a fuel poverty background. My previous job was running a large youth work charity working with disadvantaged young people. So what have I learned? The challenges, the things we see on the telly are really very real for people. So fuel poverty is an issue for people on a day-to-day basis, and it is genuinely a struggle for people to heat their homes. There's a lot of worry about it, a lot of misunderstanding, and generally people who are struggling with paying their fuel bills are also struggling with paying their food bills. They often live in poor housing with mould and damp and that kind of thing. So they're struggling with all sorts of things, and the fuel crisis, the energy crisis, has made it far worse. And there are real issues there. I've also learned that changing our energy system is really, really complicated. It's easy to say we should build more renewables and that kind of thing, but the single biggest barrier to going renewable and going green on our electricity in this country is that the grid, the national grid, literally the cables that run up and down our country, are not in the right places, basically. We have a system that was based on 40 or 50 large, generally coal-fired or nuclear-fired power stations. So there are very big cables that run between them and then to all of our cities and towns and villages and homes. But the trouble is, the sun, where we put solar panels or where the wind blows, is not where those cables are. So we were supporting and it's therefore very expensive and very time-consuming to put those cables in. And I'll give you an example. We were working with a community group who already had a wind turbine up in one of the valleys in South Wales, but wanted to put 2 more in. The cost of the turbines themselves were about 1.5 million, but the connection to the grid was about £3 billion because there was no cable anywhere near it. And it would have taken about 9 years to hook the cable up, partly because government takes a long time, but also partly because there's about 4 companies that create in the whole world who make this type of cable, and they've got supply chain problems. So again, it's all of these things that are very practical problems that we're facing as a country, as a world, in going green. The second thing is that the market system is wrong. The reason we're all paying such high energy prices is because the market is set up in what's called we pay the marginal cost. So we pay the cost of the fuel, in this case gas, that costs the most. So whilst it doesn't cost any extra to generate wind-powered electricity or solar-powered electricity or even nuclear electricity since the war in Ukraine, the way the market is set up means that because gas is so expensive, that is the price we all pay for every electron of electricity that comes through our cables. So it's just a simple, I say it's simple, it's one of those things that it sounds simple, but we need to change the market so that the price of your electricity, if it is renewably generated, reflects the real cost of generating that electricity, which then should drive investment in renewables because they're way cheaper than gas and other fossil fuels at the moment. But again, we're stuck with a system that was really sort of based from the sort of 1970s, 1980s. The final thing is the planning system is really slow. That's something, again, that actually local people can have a really big say in. You know, there is a lot of objection to new wind farms, to solar farms and the like. We have a whole communities team whose job it is, particularly in Wales, where they're building lots of renewable energy generation. There is a real resistance to new wind turbines. It's partly because local people feel, yet again, big companies are coming in, extracting their resource and taking it away, and they don't benefit from it, but they just get the downside, which is the wind turbine on the top of the hill. So what we're trying to do is to make sure that those local communities benefit from cheaper electricity, from the jobs, from the maintenance and that kind of thing, and actually that can help the system. Because if local people object to new developments, it can hold the whole thing up for years and years. So I don't know if you know, there's one of the big new offshore wind farms off the coast of Norfolk, I think it was held up by an extra 6 months simply because one person put in a legal challenge, not about whether or not it was a good thing to do, but and to have the wind turbines there, but simply on a technicality. He didn't want them there, so there was a technicality, a planning technicality that hadn't been properly followed. So the whole thing had to go back again and start again. So it was 6 months delayed. So look, you know, and we need a good planning system to keep our countryside as we want it. But local people saying positive things about renewable energy and retrofit is really helpful in helping to push some of these things that we need to get done through our system. So those are my observations. I'm really happy. I'm aware that I've sort of gone through quite a lot of detailed stuff, but I'm going to stand here and say I'm not quite sure I've pitched it right. So I'm very happy to talk about the politics. I'm very happy to talk about the biochar and any of the other sort of technical things, and hoping that way we can get a conversation and get you the information you need. But thank you very much for listening. Please do you know, get in contact with us, have a look at our website. All of the information is there, all of our helplines, all of the 101 tips that you can give out to other people. You know, we are hopefully a successful local charity that is starting to go national, so it's something to be proud of in the local area. I hope what I've been telling you is useful, and let's go for questions. Thank you very much.